So I'm gonna re-record as my original workshop was being recorded on 2 devices, and I think for cleanliness and just easier time just posting, I'm just gonna do it again. Thank you to those who came, and let me restart my Huitzilopochtli / Winter Solstice chat and class. So let's begin with the name. Huitzilopochtli means southern hummingbird or hummingbird of the left. So essentially hummingbird of the left or hummingbird of the south. These have to do with the directions. So let's begin before we get into the south, which is a very key direction in indigenous cosmology. I'll start with the left side of our bodies, which is our heart. So, unlike other birds, the hummingbird is more heart than body. This is a key sort of thing that I want to ground us in, is the heart, as well as the fact that unlike other birds, hummingbirds have this ability to fly and stay in place, as well as fly upwards, not just straight forwards, upwards, downwards, even backwards. And so in this, the hummingbird also represents willpower. So far we have for meanings the left, the south, heart, and willpower. However, I will explain how Huitzilopochtli and thus hummingbirds also to represent fallen warriors who have reincarnated as well. So this takes us right into the mythology of Huitzilopochtli and the birth of Huitzilopochtli. Let's get into this guiding force. I'm going to refrain from using the word God because I believe that that word is used and misappropriated within Mexica context. So I'm going to use the word guiding force, but you can feel free to use the word deity too if that resonates with you, or guide. But yes, this beautiful artwork is made by Mi Corazon Mexica. Highly recommend. Check them out on all the things. But yes, so it is said that Huitzilopochtli came out as a warrior. And so we're going to get into why that is. But to start, I actually just want us to focus on sort of the adornments, specifically the makeup. So as you can see, there is blue makeup, and I've heard some sources call this, or retellings of the myth of Huitzilopochtli's birth, as sort of blue paint of the children. So that element of joy and kind of childhood takes us back to what we mean when I say hummingbird of the south. So that is very key. We're going to be focusing on the direction of the south a lot in this class, but I will say right now off the top of my head that the south has to do with the children, as well as mushrooms, specifically psychedelic mushrooms, are known as niñitos. And so I don't have to go too into that. There's a whole other topic. But yes, so the South has to do with children and spirits that haven't incarnated yet, but are on their way. So sort of descendants. And in that, the North represents ancestors and people who have already passed. We can't talk about one direction without the other, right? So North and South kind of play off of each other. And of course, and I've seen this with a lot of other cultures, there's an overlap with the North kind of being like the direction that you're going towards, and the South is a place to come from. But we're going to explore it in multiple ways right now. You'll see in this myth how those directions play out, as well as in the astronomy. Going back to the origins of Huitzilopochtli, the myth that I'm gonna be focused on one specific myth. There are a couple more, but I'm gonna be focusing on the one of Coatlicue and the miraculous birth. It was said that Coatlicue, who is also a guiding force that has to do with Mother Nature specifically, and is said to be, our planet Earth. She was sweeping her temple, and her temple is known as Coatepec, the mountain of the serpent. So I'll go back to that. And so, yes, this is what the mountain looked like. I don't know if this is a physical place. And so she was sweeping her temple when all of a sudden feathers came down from the air. And so she grabbed them up and put them by her stomach and continued sweeping up the temple. Which I just love that concept for a second, like the concept of a mother figure deity cleaning her own temple and like keeping that up. It just shows how deeply sacred cleaning is to our cultures, that we would be like, well, yes, our mother and guiding force was also cleaning her temple as any mother would, right? Going back to the myth, she had these feathers, and all of a sudden she looks down and they're gone. It turns out these feathers kind of miraculously impregnated her. So they were gone and she was pregnant. Oh, that is a story. And so when the siblings were going to go to Coyolxauhqui, who was the eldest daughter of Coatlicue, found out about this along with all the other siblings. And so there's a few names for these siblings that I'll get into, but for now, it's Coatlicue's children, other children, were super upset to discover this and were like, oh my god, like, there's no way, like, there's no way this isn't illegitimate. They were kind of just seeing the controversy instead of seeing it as a miracle, and were just like, we need to kill her, which is wild. But yes, that is the myth. They're like, let's just be done with her and the child too, because this child, we don't know where it came from, we don't know who the dad is. And so there comes this battle. And so here's the image of Huitzilopochtli fighting his siblings to the death. And it is said, going back to this image, much more beautiful image of Coyolxauhqui, that when he battled his sister, her head became the moon, and the rest of her body was kind of like dismembered and all over, and some of her body parts, I think, became mountains. Definitely don't quote me on the rest of the body parts, but for sure her head became the moon. And for the other siblings, going back to the other siblings, so they have a few names. First of all, there's said to be 400 of them. However, 400 is to Nahua, in the Nahua language, is more like saying innumerable. It's kind of how when we say, it's a figure of speech like a million, to mean too many to count. So I also think that's really cool that it's 400, because the term Nahua itself is very connected to the number 4. But anyways, that's a whole other thing in the language. So anyways, they're known as Senson Huitznahua. Senson Huitznahua. They're also known in Spanish as Surianos, because when they battled, it is said that all the ones who Huitzilopochtli essentially had no mercy on, they were begging him to stop. This is like the most epic warrior that they've ever seen in their life. And he just had this rage of revenge. Like, how dare you attack or try to hurt my mom? Essentially, all that I know, right? Just coming out with this thirst for revenge and protecting. And it is said that in the womb, he was telling Coatlicue, relax, don't worry, like, if that's not going to happen. Just came out the womb put on that paint that I tell you about, like the blue paint that has to do with children, and then also like a warrior paint on the face, and just came out. Anyways, going back to the Surianos, it has a name in Spanish because they fled south. Supposedly, those siblings that he did not necessarily spare, but were able to run away and get away, were going to the south, and they became stars. So Koyol Shoki became the moon, and the other siblings became stars. So these are pictured in the constellations. So that is the myth, supposedly, of our Mother Earth, the moon, and the stars. And you're going to ask, what is Huitzilopochtli? Huitzilopochtli is the sun. And so we're going to look at this weapon that Huitzilopochtli is holding that is Shukoat, which means fire serpent. Shukoat. And this is an amazing weapon, but it's simply the fiery beams of the sun. So you could think of the beams as fire rays, fire serpents. He is essentially the most potent warrior born by a miracle, right? All this myth, let's connect it to the astronomy. How does it connect to astronomy? So Huitzilopochtli is the birth or the rebirth of the sun. Specifically, his birth is said to have happened on winter solstice. So why would that, how does this connect? So during the winter solstice, this is what we're looking at. The sun passes on the Tropic of Capricorn. And the northern hemisphere, you see on the yellow dotted line, that's about where this myth is, created in central Mexico. And the sun is further south. So that is where the name also comes from and connects to the south. Huitzilopochtli, southern hummingbird. So another reason why this connects to the name Huitzilopochtli and the symbolism of the hummingbird is because the hummingbird is the smallest bird. And the Nahua astronomers, who actually had a whole system of ranking of birds, and it's similar to Mayans, where we didn't just have like the numbers for the dates and the signs, but we also had birds assigned to our astronomy, or like our astrology, I guess you'd say. It was more like a birth astrology, in that it assigned people certain traits and certain personalities based on the day that they were born. So that is a whole other topic, but I just will show it right here briefly, in that over here on the right, this is Huitzilopochtli, and it says winter solstice, but it was believed that this same Huitzilopochtli later became an eagle, and that is another bird in this kind of ranking that I'm talking about within Nahua astrology. And so the one in the middle has to do with fall equinox. And we're going to have to remember this because it deeply connects to Mexico, like the creation of Mexico as a country, as a myth, as the flag, etc., just Tenochtitlan and the empire. So these all relate to astronomy, and the creation of Mexico it cannot be divided from the indigenous astronomy. So all that to say, going back to Huitzilopochtli for a second, we're going to put a pin in that eagle. Why are we celebrating? How did they celebrate this myth? Because at the end of the day, we are and they were celebrating that at the end of the longest night of the year, the sun has triumphed, right? And so this celebration also took place, or takes place, I should say, during a month called Panquetzalitzli, which means the raising of the banners. And specifically, I will actually fast forward for a little bit to a quote from Brown Beret's organization. Panquetzalitzli, I'm going to go to the bottom paragraph. The raising of the banners symbolizes the offerings as we raise the pantli, which symbolizes our responsibilities before the battles that confront us as we fight in defense of our mother, the earth, and our down oppressed brothers and sisters. So I've heard lots of things also about the raising of the banners, not just being like, I'm ready for like a battle, in the sense like, yes, Huitzilopochtli is a warrior and it has to do with defending Mother Earth, but also and triumph and all that. Um, However, Banquetzalitzli this month is very much tied to personal pride. I would say too. It's like a collective pride, but personal triumphs as well. And so this is a month where people should celebrate themselves, is what I've heard, is and we're able to kind of list their accomplishments, be like, actually I did these things this year, this is how I did great. It's not just like a literal warrior, um it's not just for the warriors, it's for everyone to kind of come together and like be like, look at what we have done. And I just think that it's kind of beautiful that it's aligns with this time of year where we are doing that in the Western world. So that is a connection that I really enjoy. And so we're going to go back to exactly how they celebrated, like really the nitty gritty. So I'm going to quote from Gabriel Kendrick Cruel on his essay Panquetzalitzli, El nacimiento de Huitzilopochtli y la caída de Tezcatlipoca. To celebrate the daughters of Huitzilopochtli, a group of unmarried young women who had lived for a year in the temples would bake a tsawali, or a life-sized figure of Huitzilopochtli from amaranth dough, toasted maize, kneaded together with maguey nectar, which sounds so good. If anyone's never had amaranth, I highly recommend it. It's very delicious. The tsawali, or the life-size Huitzilopochtli figure, was decked out in paper garments by priests and then carried in a grand procession to the great temple. There are the sons of Huitzilopochtli, so I guess there's also the sons of Huitzilopochtli. I don't know if they lived in this temple too. They received the effigy along with 400 amaranth bones, quote unquote. And so this ties to the Surianos, this ties to the siblings, the stars. And I think the bones are kind of like their remains, literally what remains of the stars. So it's like stardust, like their way of, yeah. So, anyways, all these were also prepared for the occasion. Then the people of Tenochtitlan gathered in the sacred precinct. There would be much singing, dancing, praising, and by the end of the day, the priests would consecrate the effigy and 400 bones of Sawali. The men would bring it to the feet of the deity, then the party would just start. And once the danza was done, it was said that these bones, quote unquote, not real bones, just amaranth, um, were done. They were blessed and redistributed. Everyone in any class could eat. Oh, sorry. So everyone, rich, poor, artisans, priests, warriors, had to fast. And they could only eat sawali prepared at home. No water was allowed. It says here this fast was called Nete Huatzalitzli, or the drying of people. So it was like a drought, the droughting of people. And yes, and every station, it says they kind of then had a parade, or like a, I don't know if it's a, yeah, I guess like you would basically say a parade with different stops on the way all throughout this kind of central Tenochtitlan, or what we now know as Mexico City. And then ending up here at the temple. And I believe what this essay is implying is that they actually had to be here, back here at the temple by sunrise to all receive Huitzilopochtli together, fasted, ready. It says it lasted 3 to 4 hours, and because it was so quick, it was called Ipaina Huitzilopochtli, or Huitzilopochtli Hurries. Yeah, I believe that this was all done pre-sunrise, but I just can't imagine that. But again, there's a lot of things that from this period that I can't imagine, and it's just so hard to be a full expert on. So definitely do your research on that aspect. Here is the Templo Mayor. This is where the grand celebration took place, as in the last stop. So this is Huitzilopochtli's temple. And this is very interesting to me because on one side you have Tlaloc's side, who's the god of rain, or god, I'm just reading it, but yes, the guiding force of rain, and Huitzilopochtli, which is the guiding force of the sun and war, over here on the red side. I think they're both very interesting, and I know that Huitzilopochtli himself is very tied to the color blue, so I also just kind of want to take this kind of slide to acknowledge that there, within Nahua myths, there is not necessarily like a strict binary, especially with the guiding forces. They change, especially in their depictions, all the time to have different representation or depictions and symbolisms. But I do think it's interesting because the red definitely connects to blood, and it was said that the blood represents like our life force and our hard work. And so I definitely could see how the guiding force of war and the sun had to do with that, right? When we go back to the heart and from the first slide. So here's kind of a render of what the Templo Mayor looked like. As you can see, it was kind of like a Russian doll of multiple temples. So every ruling period, they would kind of build and expand upon the temples and build over the temples, even until they created this masterpiece. So there was multiple temples that all had to do with different kind of ruling periods or governmental ruling periods. Here's a depiction of the temples is over here as well. So this was like fascinating to the conquistadors. They were just like, am I in a dream? Because it was so tall. This is what it looks like now. So what's really kind of jarring is that the same materials from the temples were then used actually to create the church that was built over it, as well as the government building. This is all within the same area. These are all like very small blocks from each other, and this is all where the procession for Huitzilopochtli on winter solstice would take place. And so it's one thing for sure. It's a lot to sit with and reckon with. I definitely remember something that my homegirl Kiki told me, which was to feel the churches, or kind of connect with who was building them. But little did I know that it was also, I didn't touch this churches in specifics walls, but like you could also very well be connecting with remains or ruins, I guess you would say ruins of a temple. So, and so with that kind of like appropriation in mind, remember when I said let's put a pin on that eagle part? I just think going to and connecting this myth specifically within the bigger Mexica story or myth as well, about sort of they were guided by Huitzilopochtli, it was said, to find a new place to settle. And they said when you see Huitzilopochtli was guiding them, they were praying to Huitzilopochtli constantly and just having visions. The Nahuas, or quote unquote Aztecs, are just the native population in Tenochtitlan. It's not kind of like one singular experience. Like there was multiple alliances within multiple tribal nations, and the Mexicas were definitely settlers in that way. So just wanting to acknowledge that, because they did literally, they were looking for a place to settle. But so that's why I'm tying it to the Mexica, right? Or this story that is said about finding and founding Tenochtitlan in this great lake. They found, they saw this eagle, it is said, with a serpent in its mouth, right? Going back to the flag, and on top of a cactus flower. And that's where they knew like this was it. This was the place that was shown to them sort of in a prophecy. And so there's a lot to unpack there. So it's just funny because I said there's a lot to unpack there, and the recording didn't fully save. And it's okay because we can unpack it again, even though it's very late at night. So let's start with the symbol of the flag. So this illustration I had earlier in the presentation showcased Huitzilopochtli as the hummingbird or the sun, the small yet growing heartbeat of the sun during the winter solstice, to an eagle. These are certainly eagles over here. This might be something else. And I'd have to honestly check the research for what the spring equinox bird would be. However, the one that I want to focus on is the autumn equinox. And as you can see, the sun is right above. And it is said that Tenochtitlan was specifically founded for that purpose of having the, what's it called? Oh my goodness. It's a thing in astrocartography. It's the word for when the planet is right above. And this is going to drive me nuts if I don't know it. But I'll definitely bring that up. However, going to the autumn equinox, if the myth of Huitzilopochtli is directly tied to the myth of Mexico and the founding of, before it was even known as Mexico, as Tenochtitlan, then I think more people should know the story of Huitzilopochtli, and two, I would like to read this quote from the Brown Berets organization, Raising of the Banners When the Sun Was Born Again. Long before the word Christmas ever touched, I think I might have read this, but I'm going to read it again. Long before Christmas ever touched this land, the Mexica welcomed winter with a celebration of light, renewal, and the birth of the sun itself, while the Spaniards and part of Europe were waiting with allegory for the birth of Jesus. So yes, it is convenient for them to draw those allegories. The inhabitants of Anahuac were preparing simultaneously to receive the sun child. And Anahuac, there's parentheses for Valley of Mexico. The people gathered to honor Huitzilopochtli, the newborn sun warrior who rose from darkness to defend his mother and bring warmth back to the world. For 20 days, flags fluttered from temples and rooftops. And so I want to take a moment to thank my ancestors, our ancestors, for being able to hide our celebrations, our pride, our knowledge, messages with, by any means, not just religious figures, with these great temples that took. I just wonder, when we are drawing comparisons to the nativity of Jesus Christ, a son of a mother who was persecuted and is born, or nativity, which just means born, birthed, in December around the solstice. Why the story of the mother is so easily seen, I'm glad that it is, but if it's maybe inconvenient for this knowledge to be shown, just as much as it is convenient. So what I mean by that is, I'm not arguing for co-optation. I am simply saying that if Huitzilopochtli came out of the womb as a warrior, saying, hands off my mother, if it's maybe inconvenient. We are pushed a narrative that it is easier to just sit back and accept. And Huitzilopochtli reminds us of our willpower, of our life force, of our ability to choose. And as much as the parallels exist in his birth and his miracle, for me, I actually argue for us to, yes, we can draw parallels, but we don't have to fuse these figures at all like the mother is already, because there are lots of mothers. And I argue that the way that colonialist ideas of gender are enacted upon us through these colonial projects, maybe it would be more exciting and more fruitful for the concept of a vibrating life force within our hearts and that we can see every day with the sun. I understand why people love to laugh and the face of the Spanish who say, oh, well, they just bowed to the sun. Before us, you had no civilization. I don't know about y'all, but this looks very organized and advanced to me as a civilization. But you see the sun every single day, and that's enough. And for me, that's enough. And so, all that to say, I'm just putting out questions. I love learning, as you can tell, and probably hear in my voice. I was very nervous in recording this, and I still am, because I'm so grateful, and my voice definitely shakes when I am talking about powerful topics. I'm definitely more skilled an orator when I'm talking about things that are not so close to home, but that is what the wisdom and courage of Huitzilopochtli is all about. It is finding the small little light that could. I almost think of hope. And that is what people were celebrating again, is at the end of the day, the nights are getting shorter and we are closer to making another cycle and living on. Sending everyone lots of health. I do want to kindly announce that my donations to the Instituto Agriológico Xochimilco is going to continue on until I find another project that I would like to support. But with every reading, I will be giving to Xochimilco, which is essentially much more on the outskirts of this beautiful land, even in its ruins. And with that, I want to shine a light on the biodiversity that the hummingbird, Huitzilopochtli, the southern hummingbird, asks us, which is to think of the descendants, to think of the children, the south direction, and most importantly, our biodiversity, which is necessary to continue on this beautiful life cycle, or cycle of life that has been very much in my head. And I think it has been for a lot of us as we get closer to the end of the year 2025. And so I just want to end on that note, and in a very Panketsalitsi nature, say I have done 10 years of astrology, and I'm so happy that I'm diving into sharing and just learning together on this specific kind of astronomy. Definitely engage and let me know what you think in the comments. Feel free to personally message me, especially if you want to get together and make some amaranth soalis next winter solstice. Or next pumpkin salitli, that I am open to celebrating together, getting together. So yes.